In the Gemara in this week's Daf, Maseches Yoma Daf Yud Aleph, the Gemara speaks about Mezuzah, Hilchas Mezuzah. So the Gemara says, middle of the Amid, the Tanya, Mezuzah's Yachid, a Mezuzah v'Yachid Nivdekes Pamayim B'Shavua. A Mezuzah that belongs to a private person, the Mezuzah of your house, Nivdekes Pamayim B'Shavua, not twice a week, Pamayim B'Shavua, twice in 7 years. V'Shal Rabbim, however, a Mezuzah that belongs to a Rabbim, like what Rashi explains, what does a Rabbim mean? The Mezuzah of a town, it belongs to the public, so over there, you check it a whole lot less, you only check it twice in 50 years. And Rashi says, because if you're going to give them jobs, it'll never happen. Twice in 50 years, you could rely that it'll be taken care of. Al Kaponim, the Gemara says, and it's a chiyuv. The Gemara says that you have to be boidik your mezuzahs in your house twice in 7 years. Why do you have to check your mezuzah? Mezuzah is why. Why do you have to check? So Rashi says right here, we're learning it, we learned it. Rashi says, you know why you have to check the mezuzah? For two reasons. First of all, maybe nignava. Could be the mezuzah that you had was stolen. V'oid, says Rashi, oi, you know what else could have happened? It could have been that even if the mezuzah is there, it could have got ruined. Nirkava. It's hot, it's cold, it rained, and it rained into the mezuzah, and the mezuzah got ruined. So mainly you have to check, you have to be boidik to make sure that the mezuzah is there. And even if the mezuzah is there, you have to make sure that the mezuzah is still kosher. So that's this Gemara, very clear. There's a chiyuv to check the mezuzah twice in 7 years. The poskim speak and try to be matzdik for those that are not makayim to check the mezuzah twice in 7 years. It's a Gemara, it's gepaskint lahalocha and shulchan aruch, that you're supposed to check the mezuzah twice in 7 years. So the Chidah brings that those that want to be matzdik, that don't check the mezuzahs twice in 7 years, I'll be the Rashi. Rashi says you have to check the mezuzah because maybe it was nignava or nirkava. So they learn it's either or, which means you have to check it for one or two reasons. You don't have to check for both. You have to check if it was nignava or if it was nirkav. So once you check that it was not nignava, means you see the mezuzahs. You have to check to make sure the mezuzahs are there. But once you see that the mezuzahs are there, you don't have to check anymore. The hainu to open up the mezuzahs, take it out of the case. Sometimes it's rolled up, it's rolled in a packaging, it's in the wall. You don't have to take it out to check the mezuzah as long as it's there.
So why would it ever be nirkava?
Oh, so we'll get to that in a minute, Be'emes, and we'll get to the Rambam in a second, and you're asking Taka good, so then Be'etzim, in Nirkava, it's always not good. Lamaisa, the Chidah, Taka says that it's not like that, and he Taka says Pshana Rashi like that as well also, and he says, Avada, you have to check the mezuzah, not only for Nignava, but also for Nirkava. He brings the Rambam. The Rambam, the Lashon Rambam is, Mezuzah Nivdekes. The Rambam doesn't even bring Nignava. Doesn't even bring Nignava. And they explain in the Rambam, the reason he doesn't bring Nignava is because automatically when you check for Nirkava, it's automatically, it's not Nignava, you have the Mezuzah. Either you automatically have the Bedika for Nignava, or you never have to check for Nignava because automatically the Mezuzah is there when you're checking it for Nirkava that it didn't get ruined. But Al Kapanim, the Rambam says clearly that Mezuzah Nivdekes, maybe it got ruined. Shema Nikra, or Nimchaka, because when you put it on the wall, it could get Nirkeves, it gets ruined. Al Kapanim says the Chidah, Avada, you have to check. You have to check that it didn't get ruined. And Itaka says, Rashi says, Rashi's not oihad, you can't pick and choose. When Rashi says nignava or nirkava, what Rashi means is you have to check for both. First of all, make sure the mezuzah is there. And even if the mezuzah is there, you also have to check and make sure that the mezuzah didn't get ruined. So what comes out so far is, the Gemara says you have to check the mezuzah. Rashi explains, what do we check for? That it's not stolen, it's not missing, v'oi, that it didn't get ruined, and that's what you have to do. There's a chiyuv to check the mezuzah twice in 7 years. The Kaf HaChaim, in his sefer Kol Yaakov, it's a very known sefer, at least for the Seifrim, the famous sefer in Safras. He brings again a makam lahakol that you don't have to check mezuzahs, to be the ones to be matzdik those that don't check the mezuzahs. Why? He says because bizmaneinu we put it into a shayferes, you put it into a case. And if you could even put it in today, you put it into waterproof and airtight, and you wrap it, and Memela, it stays, it doesn't get ruined. So Memela, you don't have to check. You don't have to check the mezuzah. Avada, you have to check the mezuzah to make sure that it's there. But once it's there, you need nivdekes. Everyone, you have to check to make sure the mezuzah is there. It wasn't stolen, or maybe it fell out at some point and no one realized. You have to check it's there. But if the mezuzah is there, you peek in, you see. If it's not a see-through case, you open up and you look in, you see it's there, that's enough. You don't have to unroll it, open it, and check it.
What would be the requirement for checking that's there? Also twice every 7 years or no?
What, for Nignava?
Yeah.
Very good, good. Avada. The Gemara says to check it, and Rashi says check it, that it's not missing. So Avada will be twice in 7 years.
It'll be the same thing.
So what we have so far is, the Gemara says a chiyuv twice in 7 years. There may be a makam lahakol not to check it, the actual mezuzah, just make sure it's there. Me'idach, the Matei Ephraim, right in the beginning of Matei Ephraim is on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, in the first siman on Elul, he says, the Lashon, v'yesh anshe maisa noyagim, to check their mezuzahs in this month. That means once a year. The Gemara says to check it twice in 7 years, says the Matei, which means about once in every 3.5 years, says the Matei Ephraim, he's a maila, he's an Indian, to check the mezuzah every year. Matei Ephraim. V'yesh, he says, v'yesh anshe maisa noyagim shemachodesh hazeh boitkin the mezuzahs. Which means more than every 3.5 years. So it's once a year. The Tshuva Me'ahava, he was in the times of the Noid B'Yudas, on the Noid B'Yudas Bezdin, he brings something else, and he says that if the mezuzah is in a place that it's very moist, it's a humid place, sometimes it could be in a room that the room has a lot of ovens and it gets very hot, that room. He says then there's actually a chiyuv to check the mezuzah more often. More often than what the Gemara says. He's a chiyuv. He doesn't say how often, but he says he's a chiyuv to check it more often. The Aruch HaShulchan brings this as well also, and the Aruch HaShulchan says once a year. But that's not what the Matei Ephraim is speaking about. The Matei Ephraim says he's a mailod, he's an Indian, anshe maisa, to check the mezuzah once a year. So not to get confused. If it's in a place that you choishish that the mezuzah could get ruined, again, let's say it's in a place that the room is boiling hot, and as much as you cover it, the heat goes through, you choishish, and it's going to get ruined. Says the Aruch HaShulchan, kegoyin b'medina yiseinu, you have to check it once a year. However, he himself says, the Tshuva Me'ahava says, that even in a place where it's fully protected, there's a maila to check the mezuzah more often than what the Gemara says. How much more often? That's what the Matei Ephraim says, once a year. So just to be masakim what we had so far, and then we're going to move along. The Gemara says there's a chiyuv to check the mezuzah, your mezuzahs, twice in 7 years. It's a chiyuv. Why do you check it? That it didn't get ruined. What happens if you're choishish that it may have gotten ruined even less than in a shorter time? You're mechuyev to check it even more frequent than twice in 7 years. What happens if you're pretty sure that it didn't get ruined? So over there the poskim say that's the makam lahakol, that you don't have to check it even twice in 7 years. L'maisa, the Dina Da'ashas and the Shulchan Aruch is to check it twice in 7 years, and the Mata Ephraim, among others, say these are Maila, these are Indian, to check it once a year. Clear. The Gemara says you have to check the Mezuzah twice in 7 years. It's an interesting lashon. Or let's say by Shal Rabim, the Gemara says twice in a Yovel. Does it have to be exact every 25 years? It's interesting. The Gemara says a lashon of twice in 7 years. Could you check it within 7 years? 2 years and then 3 years, 3 and then 4. Sorry, could you check? Does it have to be exact? So Rabbi Chaim Kanevsky in his Sefer on the Maseches Mezuzah brings this shaila, and he says, of course, there's no tzad, even if it doesn't have to be exact, that you could check it twice. You want to get it off your head, so you check it once this week and once next week. And maybe let's check twice in 7 years. You for sure have to spread it out over the 7 years. But does it have to be exact every 3.5 years? Or could it be be'erach? Within, a Shemitah, you want it to stay on track. So within the Shemitah, you check it out. And in between, some point in the middle, it could be 3 and 4, maybe even 5 and 2, but somewhere in the middle. So really it says, Mestaber, if the Gemara says a lashon, that it does it twice in 7 years, doesn't mean exact. Twice in 7 years, it means be'erach. It should be within the time of 7 years. You should have checked it twice. But Lamaisi, he brings the lashon of Masechtas Mezuzah. The lashon is you check the Mezuzah once in 25 years. Shall Rabbim. So he says once he changed. It's not the lashon HaGemara. Once in 25 years. Doesn't mean be'erach. Once in 25 years means you split it exactly across 25 years and 25 years. And the same thing is also twice in 7 years, means very neat. 3.5 years, and then again you check it again afterwards, 3.5 years. And Mameli says it's mestaber not to make a machloikis that the Gemara holds differently. So even though the Gemara says a lashon twice in 7 years means taka twice in 7 years, but it's every 3.5 years.
Why wouldn't the Gemara just say that?
What?
The Gemara should just say it like that.
Maybe it's shorter to say instead of once every 3.5 years. Good shaila. Why does the Gemara say it?
3.5 years also, if you wanted to just...
Gemara could have said you have to check it every 3.5 years. Good shaila. The Aruch HaShulchan, after I saw how Rabbi Chaim Kanevsky says that it has to be taka in an equal time every 3.5 years, you take a look in the Aruch HaShulchan, he also says that. He says it clear. Pshat is you have to check it every 3.5 years. Yeah, it's a shaila taka. Why couldn't the Gemara say, just like in the Masechta Soifrim, the Gemara could have also said every 3.5 years. Even though we said, the Gemara says you check it every 3.5 years, and as we mentioned before, with an exception that if it's in a place that the mezuzah could get ruined, within 3.5 years you have to check it more often. In Masechtas Mezuzah brings that if you're moving, you have to check the mezuzahs then as well also. Why do you have to check the mezuzahs? Sir Chaim Kanevsky over there in the Pirish says 2 reasons. One reason is, first of all, because when you move it from one place to another place, it no longer has the chazaka that it's kosher. Even though it's interesting because the chazaka, the etzem is on the mezuzah itself.
What if you're leaving them?
The mezuzah, the chazaka is not on the place, l'chayra. It's a chazaka that it's kosher on this door. The chazaka is that it's a kosher mezuzah.
What if someone's leaving them? They're moving out of an apartment and they have to leave them. But they need to have them checked before they move, or it's all
No. You're asking what happens if, in Hilchas Mezuzah, it's known that if you move out of your house, no matter what, you should not take off the mezuzahs. You should not take off the mezuzahs. So over there, you're not moving the mezuzahs. If you're moving the mezuzahs, you have to check them. If you move out of the house, you're not moving the mezuzahs.
Does the new homeowner need to check them or not? Because he doesn't have a chazaka with them there.
So it's definitely not on the person. It's a chazaka on the mezuzah. It's interesting, Taka, he says that if you move the mezuzah from one house to another house, then you have to check the mezuzahs. L'chayra, if it's kosher, it's kosher. But then he says another reason. He says the reason why you have to check the mezuzahs again, or you have to check them, he says it's because could be when you took them down, by taking them down, nahin and a hair, it got ruined. When it's on the wall, it is weird, it's on the door, so it's there. Why? But once you take it down, you're moving it and you nahin and a hair, it might have gotten ruined. What's the nafkamina? The nafkamina is a pashat nafkamina, ledina. If you take down the mezuzahs, but not to move it to a different house, you take down the mezuzahs because you're painting, right? You're painting and you take down the mezuzahs. When you're putting them back up, you have to check the mezuzahs. If the reason why you have to check the mezuzahs is because you're moving it to a new place so it no longer has the chazaka, so if you take down the mezuzahs and you're putting it back on the same door, you don't have to check the mezuzahs. Mashenkin, if the reason why you have to check the mezuzahs is because when you take it down, by taking it down, it may have gotten ruined. So even if you're taking it down for your own house, you're painting the door, before putting it back up, you have to have it checked. So far we spoke about the halacha that you have to check the mezuzah every 3.5 years. We spoke about it. Is there makam lahakal not to check? Sometimes you have to check even more often. These are Indian to check more often. You're checking the mezuzahs. Whether it's 3.5 years, whether it's once a year, you take down the mezuzahs to check the mezuzahs. When you put the mezuzahs back up, do you have to make a bracha?
Same day, not the same day.
What'd you say?
It's the same day, it's not the same day.
Why would it make a difference a different day? So you're touching upon the concept.
If it's not in the 30 days.
So that's a different discussion. B'chlal, if a person puts a mezuzah where there's no chiyuv. If you buy a house, you have to put the mezuzah right away. If you rent a house, you only mechuyev to put the mezuzah after 30 days. And what happens if you put it toich to 30 days? But let's say we're talking about you're living in a house, it's your house. Or you rented the house and it's after 30 days and you just took down the mezuzahs to check the mezuzahs. Now you're putting them back up. Do you have to make a bracha? They were down, you have to put it back up. So the emphasis, the poskim are masupik about it, the Birkei Yosef. And he brings that the poskim argue if you have to make a bracha or not, and safek brachas lahakol. The Piskei Tshuva brings this Birkei Yosef, and really he's bothered. He says, why should I make a difference? What's the havamini you should have to make a bracha? Do you know hesach hadas? Just like a talus. A person takes off the talus to go to the bathroom. There's no hesach hadas. That's why what you mentioned about the next day could be over the ear. There's the hesach hadas. The Ben Ish Chai speaks about it, and he says that if there's hesach hadas, then you have to make a bracha. Take a look in the hesach in the Ben Ish Chai. It's interesting. He says if a person wants Masiach Das because you have to go to get a new mezuzah holder. That's very interesting. That's Hesach Hadas. Even if a person takes it down and it goes up the next day, what's the gather of Hesach Hadas? Somebody comes a cipher to check the mezuzahs and he brings it the morning and the next night, that night. People would like to make sure to get it back that night because they don't want to be a day without a mezuzah. But in Hilchas Hesach Hadas, let's say a person has a lot of mezuzahs. A person has a huge house with a lot of mezuzahs. And it takes time to check. It takes 3 days to check the mezuzahs. So that's hesach hadas. It's not hesach hadas. A person's supposed to check the mezuzahs for 30 hours straight. He checks for 8 hours a day, and then he continues the next day. Al Kapanim, there's a shaila about it if you have to make a bracha. Lamaisa safek brachas lahakol. So you're going to go and you're Mekayim this din of the Dina Dashas and the Shulchan Aruch, the checking mezuzahs every 3.5 years. When you take down the mezuzahs and it gets put back up, whether that night, whenever it gets put back up, you don't have to make a bracha.
He's allowed to take them all down? If he knows he's not going to finish checking them all in one day, you're allowed to take them down?
What? That's part of checking. You want to know if you're mechuyev to take down 2 at a time per day.
Let's say he lives.
Let's say he takes them.
He knows he cannot check all the mezuzahs in one day.
I don't know. It's a good shaila, but the mistaber is that's part of checking it. If you have a cipher that comes, does the cipher have to come and check? Let's say he knows he could check only 10 a day, and the person has 30 mezuzahs. Does he have to each one, or that's part of checking the mezuzahs? I don't know. Though lamaisa people would prefer that the mezuzah should be on as a shmir. We'll end off the shir with that. But Al Kapanim, I don't know, Tak, if you know you can't do it all, do you have to take, you could ask the same question. Let's say it takes him a whole day to check. So does he have to take off 3 in the morning, put them back 5 hours later? There, probably you would agree that you don't have to do that. To take 3, put it back, another 3. So then you could take them all down, you check them, you put them back up. But it's a good shiloh, if you ma'ayin. One thing I do want to say, which is brought tak over there in the Pischei Tshuva, and I get to shaila pretty often. What happens if the mezuzah falls down? It happens. Stam in the halacha, you're supposed to put it up properly. Recently in the night kollel, we learned Hilchos Mezuzah. So I gave a whole shir about what type of, let's say, using tape, nails, hanging up the mezuzah. But lamaisa it happens, regardless of how you put up a mezuzah. It gets knocked, it could fall down. The mezuzah could fall down. Or sometimes just the mezuzah itself falls out. It could happen. So over there, you have to make a bracha. You put it back, you make a bracha. It's important to point out that all that we're speaking today is all, let's call it a post-check, the hainu. You're supposed to check the mezuzah every 3.5 years. This is only once the mezuzah went through proper screening that it's kosher. To Shulchan Aruch and Hilchas Tefillin, and like the poskim say, it's by all safris, by mezuzah as well. The Shulchan Aruch says a very interesting lashon. Or Vosner and Shevet Alevi says, if you take a look at the lashon of the Shulchan Aruch, how intense you have to check the mezuzah. Kol parsha, speaking about tefillin. Achar sheyichtevenu, similar with Bais Siv Chaf Aleph. Every parsha after you write it, yikra'eno heitev, you should read it well. Bikavana, vidiktuk, you should really read it, look it over well. Pamayim v'shalish, and then you v'yachsi v'kirana koyim, read it again. Al Kapanim, you have to really check it in the beginning. Rav Vosner in Tshuva says, for many reasons, and that is, for most of the part, the minig bizmanenu, to have somebody else check it. First of all, unfortunately, some seifrim are not the best seifrim, they're not Yerushalayim, they don't know all the halachas, so that's why you should have somebody else. Also, somebody else could check better than the person himself that wrote it. So you have somebody check it properly. The same as for mezuzah, so it should be checked properly. He also speaks about that if there's a way to check it besides somebody else, behind it, a computer check it, it should be checked by computer. And he says, Avada, that's not instead of a person, but it's an addition, because he says the computer doesn't cover everything, even though when he wrote that tshuva, then the computer check was just checking for chaseris. The computer could see if it's missing a letter. But today, the computer check is way more advanced, but still, it can't pick up everything. Some things the computer can't notice that it's a chop or not a chop. But Al Kapanim, you check it properly. On top of that, every 3.5 years, you check to make sure that it didn't get ruined. Oh, but because you're checking that it didn't get ruined, be'etzem, you yourself could do it. You check to look inside to make sure the mezuzah is there. Then you open it up. If you know what you're doing, you could check to see if nothing got ruined. The etzem. Well, you give it to a cipher to check it properly. Why? The mezuzah already, when you bought the mezuzah was checked thoroughly that it's 100% kosher. When you open it up after 3.5 years, what are you checking? You're checking to see if water ran through, these are running the ICS, these cracks. If there is problems in the mezuzah, make sure to give it to a cipher. But be'etzem, you open it up, and if it looks perfectly fine, it's good. We said you have to check the mezuzahs every 3.5 years. Sometimes it can be hard, or let's call it maybe costly. A person can have a lot of mezuzahs. Even if a person has a 2-3 bedroom, we're talking about kamat 10 mezuzahs, and if a person has a very big house, it could have 30-40 mezuzahs. So the poskim speak about, could you rely, just like by Hilchas Toiloin, you don't have to check all the vegetables to make sure that there's no bugs. You check some, and when you check some of the heads of lettuce or certain vegetables and you see that there's no bugs, it's hochzak that there's no toilon. So could you do the same thing with mezuzahs? You take down 2-3 mezuzahs and you check, and if it's kosher, then it's hochzak that the mezuzahs are good. So the poskim say you can't do it. It's different than toilon, because toilon, you checked some, if there's no bugs, so okay, this season is bug-free, this batch is bug-free. By mezuzahs, just because this mezuzah is not ruined, there could be the mezuzah on the back door, it dripped in. Or the other room, for some reason, there was a leak, a pipe, it dripped down, it got ruined. So maybe you have to check all the mezuzahs. These are Tshuvas Chasam Sofer. Somebody asked him, one of his Talmidim has a house of many mezuzahs. He writes in the Tshuva 30-40 mezuzahs. But it's a house of Shutvim. Either the Pshat, I'm not sure exactly the Metzias, it was just owned by Shutvim, but it's a house of Shutvim. So he asked the Chasam Sofer, the Gemara we just learned, and this week's staff, the Gemara says that a mezuzah shall rabim, you only have to check every 25 years. So he asked the Chasam Sofer, could I check this house, the mezuzahs, only once in every 25 years, because it's shal shutfim. So the Chasam Sofer wrote back in the Tshuva, and he says, if you take a look when the shal rabim, Rashi explains, Rabim doesn't just mean shutfim. Rabim means, like Rashi says, shari chatzeiros, umedinois, va'ayoros. Rabim means Rabim. Rabim doesn't just mean shutfim. And the Mela, you have to check all the mezuzahs. Just real quickly, Atkan we spoke about mezuzahs, and that's what we're learning here in the Gemara in Yuma. Just for mamash a brief moment, I want to touch upon tefillin. The reason why I want to talk about tefillin is because it's very interesting. The Gemara here in Yuma that we're learning speaks about the chiyuv to check the mezuzahs twice in 7 years. There is no Gemara that says that you have to check tefillin. There is no such Gemara. It's interesting. Ad kedei kach, the Shulchan Aruch says clearly in Hilchas Tefillin that you do not have to check tefillin. If there's no issue, if a person's tefillin fell into the water, or if you leave it in a car at 150 degrees and it could be the letters melted, you have to check the tefillin. But if it's in a health, you use it, you put it on, you keep it in your house, in the kabi, you don't have to check the tefillin. Though there is a mechilta in last week's parsha, Parshas Boi Miyamim Yemima, the mechilta, a drasha, may even be a deraisa. The mechilta says, Davar acher miyamim yemima magid sha'adam tzarech livdoik es atfilin achas l'yud beis chaydish. You have to check the tefillin once a year. It's also Yerushalmi. Tosfos brings this in Menachos, and Tosfos brings the Shimusha Rabbah, Sefer on Safras, that says, even though the Mechilta says once a year, it's twice in 7 years, like Mezuzah. Lamaisa, even though the Mishnah Berurah says that you should, there's a mila, yes, to check your tefillin, there's probably twice in 7 years. The Matei Ephraim that we said to check the mezuzahs once a year says to check the tefillin as well once a year. Lamaisa, Reb Shlomo Zalman, I think it's said by a lot of Seifrim, if I remember correctly, hearing it from my grandfather, Ramortchi Yudah Lubart, was a Seifer. I got my tefillin from him. He also said that he's a mila of not checking. Explains Reb Shlomo Zalman, and other Seifrim say that why? Because when it's closed, it's sealed. When you open up the tefillin, you're asking for problems. Once it's closed, it's sealed, you open it up, you're breaking it apart, it's already not the same when you put it back together. Memela, Lagabe tefillin, it's a shaila. It's zicha, not a gemara. The whole shir today we spoke about it in Mezuzah, that the Gemara says to check the mezuzahs. Tefillin, the Shulchan Aruch says you don't have to. The Chavetz Chaim says he's a mila. The Matei Ephraim says he's a mila. Others say maybe not to check. Just to conclude, Lagabi checking the mezuzahs. So avada, when you check the mezuzah, you want to make sure that you have a mezuzah. And if you have a mezuzah, you makayim a mitzvah. Could be even every minute, every second that you have a mezuzah. If I remember correctly now from Hilchas Mezuzah, maybe even 2 mitzvahs, because the Torah says it twice, every time you have a mezuzah, every minute. But besides being Makayim a mitzvah, it's also a shmira. Kiyedua. I was learning with my Chavrusis, he was saying a story, Kiyedua, these stories and stories throughout the Doiris. In Shivchei Ari, that's stories about the Arizal. They bring over there that there was a problem in the house that a dibuk was coming in, and he said to check the mezuzahs. So over there the story was that there was no mezuzah. Mises, he's constantly mises of different stories that something was happening, and they checked the mezuzahs. So it's a shmira. The Mordechai brings from the Merami Rutenberg. I'm gonna end with this. Muftachani. Shekol bias shemesukim b'mezuzah. Every bias that has a mezuzah kihilchasa. Kihilchasa doesn't just mean that you have a kosher mezuzah. It has to be shlisha elyon. Ein shum mazik yochol lishlit by. It's a shmira. It's a shmira. So when we learn the Gemara that a person is supposed to be boidik, you're supposed to be boidik because that's the din of the Shas v'Shulchan Aruch, and you want to be boidik to make sure that you have the mitzvah. But on top of that, also, you want to make sure that you have the mezuzah, that it should be a shmira. Have a wonderful Shabbos.